Bible stories with details that you may not have picked up on. Today we're going to be talking about the Tower of Babel. Now, in Genesis 11, we get this depiction of this society that is building this immensely tall tower. Now, these people that are building the tower, they are pretty close in genealogical record to Noah and his family, which means that they're going to be some of the more immediate descendants of Noah's sons and their wives. So they're going to be intimately familiar with what just happened in the world. They're going to be very familiar with this story of, hey, God killed every single person on earth except for Noah and his family, except for our grandparents. And so they decide we're going to build an extremely tall tower. Why would anybody build an extremely tall tower in that time? And how would that tower somehow make them feel that they could subvert God? Saying like, hey, if we have this, then nothing can stop us. Nothing's impossible for us. Because they had this fear that God was going to flood the earth again. Now, God promised specifically, he said, I will put my bow in the sky so that you will see that and know that I promise I will never flood the earth again. Now, the cool thing about the rainbow is that it's literally God's bow. Like, picture a bow and arrow. So whenever the bow is pointed at the earth, was God flooding the earth. That was him going after the earth, targeting people. But then after that, and he started over, what did God do with his bow? He turned it from this position to this position, pointing it at himself. So that was indicating that the next person that's going to die for the sake of humanity, for the sake of their sins, was himself. So the rainbow itself was a foreshadow, it was a promise of Jesus dying in our place. It's really cool. But the people did not trust God. They did not think, oh, he's not going to flood the earth again. Let's find a solution to make sure that if he does flood it again, we can survive. So they build this incredibly tall tower that presumably their hope is that the top of it is going to be above waterline and that it's going to be tough enough. See, they built it out of these very specific bricks, so it's going to be quite sturdy. And a lot of people, including myself, when I first read this, I made the immediate conclusion, like the immediate speculation where it's just like, okay, wait. A gigantic tower made of very specific bricks that was not finished at the top. That sounds like this. However, it's not. And we know that because it tells us that it was in this location of Babylon called Shinar, and Shinar is basically like modern day Iraq. Definitively not Egypt, which means no, the pyramids are absolutely not the Tower of Babel, but my goodness, wouldn't that be cool? That would be such an awesome plot twist if that was the unfinished Tower of Babel. But it's not, so don't worry about that theory. But extra biblical sources that are not theonostas, they are not true, they are just speculative, but some of them will give us a little bit further detail on things that may or may not be accurate. And some of them expand upon how tall they claim the Tower of Babel was. Which again, we don't know these numbers are true, but one of them gives the rough estimate of it being about 5,000 feet tall. Which that would be close to a mile tall, which means that would be a pretty substantial distance to be able to survive that. But either way, their intent was saying like, hey, we can't trust God, so we have to do this ourselves. And if God does try to flood us, nothing's going to be impossible for us again because we will survive. So God sees what they're doing. And then we see the Trinity talking to himself again. It's beautiful. Where he says, let us go down there and confuse their language. So what God does is he separates people into groups based on their language, where he confuses their language, making it where they're no longer all speaking the same language, but now they're all speaking multiple languages. This means that they cannot communicate efficiently enough to actually construct this massive tower. And say that those extra biblical sources were even close. You know how much communication would be needed back then with that amount of technology to build a tower that is close to 5,000 feet tall? Like, my goodness, that's ridiculous. I'm gonna have to definitely fact check this, but I don't think we're even close to that with our tallest tower in today's time. But again, that is an extra biblical number, which means that we don't know if it's accurate, so take that with a massive grain of salt and don't focus on the number. God is essentially saying, hey, they do not trust my promise. So I'm going to make them trust my promise. They'll have no choice, because if I wanted to flood the earth, which I promised I wouldn't, but if I wanted to, they have no choice. They will perish the same way that everyone else did. And that's just God being sovereign and wanting people to understand that God is sovereign, that he is in full control of every aspect of his creation. And whenever people are trying to say like, no, we can do this ourselves, we don't need God, boy, does that sound like modern atheists. Instead of leaning on God, the one who holds everything together, the one who creates the uniformity of nature, the one who gives us reason to assume that everything in the future is going to equate to everything that's already passed. For example, on that, the atheist has absolutely no reason to ever think that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. But the Christian has wonderful, ample evidence to say that the sun will rise tomorrow because we trust God's uniformity in nature, that it is going to come out tomorrow the same way that it came today. So the whole story is about God demanding that we trust him. And when these people were trying not to trust him, when these people were trying to have a plan B rather than trusting God as a plan A, God said, nope, you have to trust me. And so he stopped them from building this precaution, forcing them to trust him. And from there, the people in those distinct groups of language, they started to scatter and build their own nations based on those languages. And over time, all of those languages evolved and adapted and turned into languages that we speak today. That's why you have German and Spanish and English and many others all being a language based on Latin, which has its roots in Aramaic. Like, language changes and evolves over time. Humans don't evolve, but language does. Humans de-evolve. We are getting slower, dumber, weaker, and sicker. But language rapidly changes, which is why modern translations in English are better than the King James, which is just 400 years old. And if you listen to someone talk who's part of like the Gen Z era, you will understand, hey, yeah, English has changed a lot in the last 10 years. So the moral of that story, which that is literal history, that is something that actually happened, is to trust God and do not trust yourselves. Trust God and lean not on your own understanding. Follow me on X. Let me know what's next. God bless.